Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs. Hey, y'all. Welcome to this week's show. It is the first day of summer. And, of course, being in North Carolina, that first day of summer was marked with our first tropical storm of the season. Just about like clockwork. But it being the first day of a new season, I'm going to do my seasonal feature. We do 4 of these a year, or at least that's the plan as it stands right now, on foraging. Foraging by the seasons. We're going to talk about how to find the wild edibles that are out in the woods and pastures and all around you right now, and also some wild medicinals. Fortunately, many of these wild edibles are also medicinal, so there's a lot of crossover. A lot of times people ask me, who are my favorite outdoor authors? What books do I turn to when it comes to foraging? And that is really how I learned to forage. I didn't really have anyone to teach me. I had field guides and books. It wasn't until later when I met the Hicks family up on Beech Mountain that I actually had someone show me what the wild plants were and open up the whole world of herbs to me. I really did start out looking for wild edibles. Probably when people think about books on wild edibles, they probably, Yule Gibbons comes to mind. That may not be as true now as it once was, of course. I mean, Yule Gibbons wrote Stalking the Wild Asparagus in the mid 60s and really introduced the baby boomer generation to wild foods, to foraging. This was the first generation to grow up in the suburbs, the first generation to really only experience nature at summer camps and such. And the whole back to nature, back to the land movement really had a lot to do with Yule Gibbons. And he was a bit of a celebrity. He was on all the talk shows of the time, and he was even doing Grape Nuts commercials when I was a kid. So maybe his name isn't as known as it once was, but I still highly recommend Stalking the Wild Asparagus, Stalking the Helpful Herbs. See, he did 2 books on these subjects that would interest us. One of my favorites is Stalking the Blue-Eyed Scallop, all about the wild foods you can find at the seashore. And he really changed my entire way of thinking about coastal foraging. Absolutely. And there's Stalking the Good Life. He also did one called Stalking the Faraway Places. He had the Stalking series. Kind of like a Bill O'Reilly. He's always killing somebody off in the title of his books. But he was quite the celebrity and a really interesting guy, great writer, a good personality too. But you may not have heard 2 of my other favorites, Bradford and Gier. Now, if you're a little older, if you were reading in the 50s and early 60s, you probably would know about Bradford Angier. Maybe you saw some of his books in the store and the library in the 70s. Bradford Angier, really interesting guy. I read a ton of books on living off the land. A bit of a plagiarist sometimes. He at least copied one book almost verbatim, and then the classic homesteading book of, I guess, the 1920s was 5 Acres and Independence, which is an excellent book, by the way. It was one of the first books I read on homesteading, and it was a life changer for me. That's what started me on the journey of homesteading and permaculture. Anyway, Bradford Angier did a book, 5 Acres and Freedom or something. Five, something like that. Anyway, he ripped people off sometimes, but he was a really good outdoor writer. And one of the very best books on foraging for wild edibles is Feasting Free on Wild Edibles by Bradford Angier. He also did one on medicinal herbs. Feasting Free on Wild Edibles was 1966. I believe that was actually the same year that Yule Gibbons came out with Stalking the Wild Asparagus. Now, one who is my absolute outdoor writer hero, a big culinary hero of mine, all around hero of mine, that I bet you really have never heard of, is the man I always refer to as the great George Leonard Herder. George Herder, a true American character. This guy, when he came back from serving in, I think it was World War One, if I'm not mistaken, could have been two, but I think it was one. Anyway, he married a Belgian lady that he met over there and inherited his parents' sporting goods store. He turned that business into the predecessor of basically Bass Pro Shops for outdoor world. He combined just this little sporting goods store with the concept of like a Sears catalog and was soon marketing um, fishing tackle, guns, hip waders and coats, snowmobiles. There was like nothing you couldn't buy from the herders. He even had his own brand of wild rice. I mean, he was selling them all over the nation, probably worldwide, and a reputation for pretty good quality at cheap prices. What was so interesting about him, he was like a P.T. Barnum. I mean, he was just a wonderful promoter. Everything was written as, this exciting, colorful language. The man also wrote like 2 dozen books, incredible books. His Wilderness Guidebook is an excellent book for learning how to live in the woods. Whether you're going for just a hiking trip or you're going to be out there, long term. It talks about foraging for wild edibles. It talks about hunting, trapping, and fishing. Setting up a camp, how to use an axe. I mean, things you really need to know. And it's written in a little more straightforward manner than, say, his Bull Cook series, which is so cool. I mean, he came up with these tall tales to accompany every single recipe he wrote in the book. And I mean, to this day, like I think it was Hank Shaw. One of them's like, George Herder was a crank. He's a nut. Yeah, well, he was laughing the whole time. He was having the biggest joke on everybody, coming up with these made-up historical anecdotes. The man traveled the world, wrote all these books, hung out with John Wayne and Ernest Hemingway, machine gunning sharks with Ernest Hemingway, just a complete nut and a real, a true classic American icon. And you wouldn't know it to look at him. He was a fairly small frame, balding, smoked a pipe, wore glasses, and I highly recommend his stuff. You can still find his books used. But the other book by Herder you really want to look for is called How to Get Out of the Rat Race and Live on $10 a Month. I don't know what $10 a month would be in today's terms. That was like 1965 or so. He wrote that book, and here we are in 2021 with inflation as much as we've devalued the dollar. But still, How to Get Out of the Rat Race is a wonderfully inspiring book with all kinds of good information, from how to build your own log cabin to, well, how to live off the land, just all kinds of good stuff. So anyway, those are the three older books that I always go for. The three older authors that I always go for. One book I keep with me pretty much all the time is Peterson's Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants. I have the edition for the Eastern United States. You probably can find one for your area. The Peterson Field Guides are the very best, in my opinion. You have black and white line drawings of each plant. You have some color photos, but you have very good, simple instructions, and it tells you what each plant is used for. How to, in case of edible wild plants, how to cook it, how to eat it. They also have one for medicinal plants, which tells you the medicinal properties of each plant. I mean, I always keep these nearby. And whenever I see a plant I'm not sure about, Peterson's usually has the answer. I mean, 99% of the time. But the other good one that I referenced last time is Billy Joe Tatum's Wild Food Field Guide and Cookbook. I believe this is out of print, but you should be able to find a used copy fairly inexpensively. What Billy Joe did, she was from the Ozarks, by the way, so her area has a lot of overlap into much of the United States, and definitely my area in the Appalachians. She broke foraging down by season. So it's real convenient for me to pick up her book and tell you kind of what you can expect to find in the summer. So let's get into this now. Let's start with amaranth. All right, amaranth is a very common wild plant. It's one you may also have in your garden. It's become very popular. And I'm going to give you a description of amaranth as detailed in the Peterson Field Guide. So I'll give you a little taste of how both of these books help me find wild foods. All right, amaranth. Coarse, hairy weeds with stout stems. There are numerous species, but there are really two that are common in the United States. They're wild anyway. Green amaranth. The leaves are dull green, ovate to lamp-shaped, long stalk. Flower clusters dense and bristly. Green amaranth hybridus is the other most common. Is a little more tall. Flower clusters are slender and nodding, and it can be 2 to 6 feet high, whereas the regular green amaranth is usually 6 to 24 inches tall. It's going to be found roadsides, fields, waste ground over most of the area. Flowers from August to October, so you look out for those nice red flowers pretty soon. Sometimes they're a little purplish. Used as a cooked grain, salad, or you can make a flour out of the seeds. I've never done that, but some people say it's really good. The tender leaves can be boiled for 10 to 15 minutes or add to salads. Tiny black seeds make a nutritious flour. All right. Next, we've got bee balm. Now, bee balm grows all over the place in the mountains of Appalachia. It's one of the prettiest plants, often called bergamot. Bergamots are large, coarse mints with showy flower heads, opposite leaves, and square stems. Remember, that's how we identify mint. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. The crushed leaves are aromatic and minty. Use as a tea. Steep the fresh or dried leaves and flower heads in hot water for about 10 minutes and sweeten to taste. Specifically, you have bee balm Oswego tea. Large ragged head of bright scarlet flowers and reddish bracts are distinctive. Wild bergamot, our most abundant species, pinkish or pale lavender with bracts commonly tinged with lilac, found in dry edges, thickets, and clearings. And purple bergamot resembles wild bergamot but with dark rose purple flowers and purplish bracts, found roadsides, thickets, and often cultivated. Blackberries. I don't think there's any reason for me to look up and describe blackberry for you. I was out foraging, wildcrafting actually. I was gathering herbs. That's the only difference between foraging and wildcrafting is you only forage for food and wildcrafting is gathering herbs. I was out gathering mimosa last week, and I was at an old cemetery, about a 300-year-old cemetery, and blackberry thickets around there were so plentiful. You could not walk. I mean, the boundary of this cemetery was nothing but blackberry thickets. And they're probably about 2 weeks from the first berries getting ripe. You know, when a blackberry is ripe, it's going to be black. Before then, it's going to go from basically pink to red to light purple, and then it's finally going to turn black. It's actually, very dark purple, but it looks black. And, blackberry, the flavor is very determinant on the soil and where they're grown. Sometimes they can be just wonderfully sweet and juicy. Sometimes they're hard. Sometimes they're even peppery. But you find a good stand on like that, when those are ripe, you could easily go over there and pick 20 or 30 gallons. 20 or 30 gallons just at the side of a cemetery. That's enough to, make some cobblers, make some wine, make some jam, and just enjoy eating blackberries. Blackberries are so abundant, and the leaf, blackberry is actually black raspberry. So the leaf has herbal use, can be used to make a tea, to tonify the internal organs, especially used by pregnant women for tonifying the uterus. Black cherry. Yeah, black cherry is a wild cherry. The berries should be coming into season. The drupes, whatever they are. Blueberries, absolutely. Blueberries are coming in. Usually I will look for my blueberries right around the 4th of July. That's when they seem to get ripe in the mountains. And up here in the mountains in North Carolina, we have wild blueberries just all over the place, especially at the higher elevations. You get up on the bald peaks, like there's well, not too far from my house is where the Outward Bound School is. It's Table Rock in the Pisgah National Forest. Anyway, Table Rock is a great place to hike. There used to be an old fire tower out there, but when you get up above the tree line, you're going up the bald parts of the rock. I mean, you're not really above the tree line, but you're where it's, really harsh weather and things don't grow as thickly. You're getting up there, you're going to see rhododendron and you're going to start seeing all the little heaths and mosses and lichens. And you have little blueberry bushes just growing out of every little crack. And the blueberries are no bigger than buckshot. So it's amazing to me. I'll just go through and just graze, on a trail. And yeah, you're not supposed to do that in every place, but it's okay to do some places. And other people are just walking along, they don't even see them. And then the most delicious, tart, sweet, wonderful blueberries. I got some growing in my yard that I was able to get established, and they're fantastic. And blueberry also is made into a tea, the blueberry leaf, also as a tonifying tea, a tonic. It's also good for colds and such. All right, burdock. Now everybody knows burdock. Well, you know it if you've been in the country. Burdock's called gobo in Japan, and they raise as a vegetable. Here in America, it's generally considered one of the worst nuisance weeds because it has burrs. Burrs are these little sticker like balls covered in Velcro. Not the soft part of Velcro, the plastic part for the little hooks. That's actually where the guy who invented Velcro got the idea from, was looking at the burrs of the burdock plant. They will stick to your clothes. They will stick to, especially your dog. I think I spent half my childhood cutting burrs out of the dog's fur. They'll get in horses' manes. They just get all over the place. But burdock is actually, it's a wonderful edible plant. I've talked before how the leaves can be eaten, the root can be eaten. You can roast the root. The leaves are great for, wrapping up some meat or fish and just cooking it straight in the campfire. But you can also cook them as a pot herb, cut them up and just cook them down. But burdock is a wonderful bitter. It's really good for the liver. Burdock and dandelion are the two go-to liver herbs that are also cooling. Whereas like barberry is a stimulant to the liver, burdock, dandelion, and milk thistle calm the liver as it helps cleanse and tonify the liver. They also, the old herbalists would have said they shrink the liver. Good for liver inflammation, liver congestion, liver function in general. Cattails is definitely the season for cattails. People always say the whole cattail is edible. I guess that's true if you want to work hard enough. Let's see what Peterson says about cattail. Cattails, young shoots and stalks, immature flower spikes, pollen, sprouts, and rootstocks. Familiar plant, often forming extensive stands in marshes, leaves are erect gourd-like. Stems unbranched, stiff, topped by compact cylindrical heads of minute flowers. Male flowers above, golden when full of pollen, disappearing later, female flowers and a sausage-like head below. Green at first, then brown. Found in fresh or brackish marshes, shallow water throughout. And literally, I don't think there's anywhere in the Carolinas or Georgia you can go where if you don't see a ditch, you're going to see some cattails. I mean, they're just everywhere. And could be a wonderful food source. I mean, this is one of those that, as I get into all the different uses of cattails, you'll realize that if there ever is a major supply chain disruption, cattails could pretty much keep us all from starving if we just knew how to use them. All right, so use. You can do them in a salad. When they're tender and green, they can be cooked like asparagus. Cooked vegetable. A flour can be made from them. They can be pickled. It says this is possibly one of the best and certainly most versatile of our native edible plants. In early spring, the young shoots, which are easily pulled from the rootstock, can be peeled to a tender white core and eaten raw or cooked like asparagus. The young spring stalks, up to 2 to 3 feet tall, can be gathered the same way and prepared in much the same way. In late spring, the green immature flower spikes can be gathered just before they erupt from their papery sheaths of leaves and boiled for a few minutes. Served with butter and eaten like corn on the cob, they make a unique wild vegetable. In early summer, the flower spikes produce a heavy coat of bright yellow pollen. Large amounts of this pollen can be gathered by shaking the heads into an open bag, After it is sifted through a strainer, the pollen makes an excellent protein-rich flour when mixed half and half with wheat flour. Be sure to dry the pollen thoroughly before storing for future use. In late summer, small horn-shaped sprouts form at the tip of the long rootstocks and remain through winter. These can be added to salads or boiled for 10 minutes and served with butter. In earliest spring, as they begin to extend just before they break through the surface of the mud, these sprouts can be peeled, boiled briefly, and pickled in hot vinegar. In addition, the starchy core at the base of each sprout can be prepared like a potato. In the late fall, winter, or early spring, the shallowly buried rootstocks become well filled with starch. To produce a good quality white flour, wash the rootstocks thoroughly, peel off the outer covering to reveal a starchy core, and crush the core in a pail of cold water, separating the starch from the fibers. Remove the fibers, allow the starch to settle, and pour off the water. When this washing process has been repeated once or twice more, you will have a pure white flour that can be used immediately or dried for future use. Now you see why that is such a useful wild edible. It gives us, I don't know, 6 different foods we can make from one plant. Chickweed should be pretty abundant in the summer. Chickweed is so easy to overlook. It's low growing. It's a wonderfully nutritious and medicinal herb as well. Yeah, the common chickweed, the mouse-ear chickweed, and the star chickweed. And once you learn to identify one of them, you're going to spot them everywhere because chickweed is just about everywhere. It's known as stellaria, that's the species. Small, prostrate, or erect weeds, small flowers, mostly long-stalked, petals often so deeply notched or cleft that there appears to be 10. Slender stems, leaves paired, generally smooth in Stellaria species, downy in Cerastium species. The Cerastium is the mouse-ear chickweed. It looks just like regular chickweed, but it has a downy texture to it. It can be used as salad or cooked grain. The tender leaves and stems can be added to salad, but are best boiled for 5 minutes and served as greens. Mouse-ear chickweed's hairy leaves should always be cooked. Chicory, I just did a long article on chicory. You can read it on the blog. Chicory can be eaten just like dandelion. Greens are good. The root can be roasted and used as an addition to coffee. I don't call it a coffee substitute. I call it an addition to coffee. That can be very, very good when done right. But most companies that sell chicory coffee do not do it right and give people a bad impression of it. Chicory is also a valuable herb. It's good for the liver. It's a bitter, very much like dandelion. And of course, dandelion should be growing very abundantly now. And we've talked before about how healthy and nutritious the dandelion is for you. You can eat the leaves. The stems can be used as a digestive bitter. The latex from the stems can actually be collected and used to remove warts. An interesting use for them. The root is so good for the liver, just like burdock. It cools, calms, tonifies, strengthens, helps the liver. The flowers can be used to make syrup or dandelion wine. Chives, yeah, there should be wild chives about if they grow in your area. There are a couple of lookalikes to your wild onions, but always remember if it smells like an onion, it's an onion. If it looks like an onion but doesn't smell like an onion, don't eat it. That's the rule. Yeah, there's a couple of poisonous plants in the lily family that, when they're very young, could look like a spring onion, but they don't smell like an onion. Just remember that. If it smells like an onion, it's an allium. Allium's the onion and garlic family, by the way. All right, daylilies. Daylilies are really interesting. Huge industry up in the mountains where I live, growing daylilies as ornamentals. Every day, the daylily puts out a flower, and that flower can be cooked and eaten just like a squash blossom. Very good, wild edible that are in landscaping, widespread, that people just overlook. They just let them go to waste. Dittany. Now, dittany is an interesting one. First of all, this is not the dittany of Crete. This dittany, this dittany, this dittany is a highly aromatic plant with wiry, much-branched stems and stalkless leaves. The leaves are hairless, dotted with clear spots. Flowers are in tufts. Their 5 lobes nearly equal. Note the two long protruding stamens and pistil. Found in dry open woods clearings throughout the eastern United States, basically, flowering from July through October. Use as a tea. Steep the fresh or dried leaves for 10 minutes in hot water and sweeten. Makes a refreshing beverage. Elderberry. And now's the time to start looking for elderberries. Wild garlic. The ramps have already come and gone, unfortunately, but you can still find some wild garlics if they grow in your area. The grapes are not in fruit yet. Right now is the time you can eat the grape leaves, and grape leaves are wonderful. I love stuffed grape leaves. The other great use for grape leaves is to keep your pickles crisp. See, those grape leaves have a little bit of tannin in there, and if you may want to make cucumber pickles that don't get mushy, you can take a couple of grape leaves and put them in there, and they'll help keep them nice and crisp. Grape has wonderful medicinal uses. I actually just did a video on it. Herbal Medicine 101. You can get all the medicinal uses for grape. And yeah, so now's a really good time to get the leaves while they're nice and tender. Ground cherry. I'm going to give one warning about ground cherries. So ground cherries are basically the wild version of like tomatillo, okay, that you've seen, probably the Mexican section of the produce aisle. I love tomatillos, and we actually have a specific North Carolina ground cherry. So this is one I do look for, and they're not always just a substitute for tomato, by the way. There's one called the pineapple ground cherry, which is delicious. I grew some last year. It's a little golden berry, probably no bigger than a ping pong ball, and it tastes like pineapple or a tropical fruit. If you're in an area that's warm enough and can grow those, I mean, put those things in your garden. They're fantastic. You can also think of them, even though they're sweet, you can think of them like a tomato, and you can make a really great salsa. We call it a pico de gallo, right? Just chop it up, put in there some cilantro, onions, and garlic, and that sweet kind of pineapple flavor goes fantastic with hot pepper. So grab a habanero. If that's a little too hot for you, maybe a few serrano peppers, but I mean, that's good stuff. And plenty of cilantro just to really bring out the flavor. The warning is, and I'm going to ask you to look this up, it's called the horse nettle. If you know what a ground cherry looks like, you look at the leaves, you're not going to mistake these two plants. If I said go outside and find something that looks like a cherry tomato with a papery husk over it, I would probably say at least half of you would come back with horse nettles if you didn't know what you're looking for. And horse nettles are in the Solanaceae family. They're more closely related to like Jimson weed and belladonna, and they're poisonous. They do have some medicinal use, but that's one that if you haven't thoroughly investigated and you're not an expert, don't touch it because you can kill yourself. So that's my warning about ground cherries. Absolutely delicious, absolutely wonderful, absolutely versatile, but learn to identify them so you don't end up with horse nettles and kill yourself. All right. Huckleberries are coming into season if you live where huckleberries grow, and I don't. Uh, Lamb's quarters are a common grain, often called wild spinach. I think we'll look this one up and get a description for it. I know at least one guy that sells lamb quarters at a farmer's market as wild spinach, and people just rave about it. But we are well past the season where spinach is going to grow in the heat of the South. You'll do New Zealand spinach and Malabar spinach, which are not true spinaches. But let's look at lamb's quarters, also called pigweed. Amaranth is also often called pigweed. A lot of things are called pigweed. But this is a chenopodium, an erect, much branched weed. Stems and undersides of leaves are often mealy to white. Leaves somewhat fleshy, variable. Upper leaves are narrow and toothless. Lower leaves roughly diamond shaped, broadly toothed. Small flowers, unobtrusive, greenish, may turn reddish. Seeds are tiny and black. Plants usually 1 to 3 feet tall. Many similar species, and most are edible. So one you can feel pretty comfortable using. Down in waste grounds. Waste grounds are like old pastures, old parking lots, roadsides. So do be careful where you forage. You don't want to get anything from contaminated soil. It's just found throughout. You're going to find lamb's quarters just about everywhere. Used as a cooked grain, a cereal, and a flour. The tender leaves and tips are excellent steamed or boiled for 10 to 15 minutes. The bulk greatly reduces after cooking. The highly nutritious seeds can be boiled to make a breakfast gruel or ground into flour. Really good plant, real good. Along with dandelions and some of the more obvious things. Lamb's quarters are a great place to start. Get your dip your toe in and get your feet wet and forage. All right, wild leeks. If you're lucky, those are the ramps again for us, and they're gone in our area. Mayapple is really interesting. Now, mayapple grows everywhere in the mountains of North Carolina, and actually, where I've seen it most abundantly, and it's kind of interesting. You've probably heard of Daniel Boone. He was a great American pioneer, Revolutionary War hero, later on senator from Kentucky against his will. He didn't want to get involved in politics. His parents are buried in Moxville, North Carolina. They had the Boone Tract. That's where Daniel Boone grew up. He followed the Yadkin and eventually went up the mountains to my area and made his camp in modern day Boone, North Carolina, which is now home of Appalachian State University. This is well before he went up into Kentucky and opened up that area. Down in Wilkes County, which I guess if you looked at a map really is between, say, Moxville and Boone, there's a little community where he had his cabin. That's where his wife and child lived. And after they died, he went on and moved to Kentucky. In that area around Moxville, North Carolina, I have never seen more mayapple grow anywhere in one spot. I mean, you can literally look at any clearing in the woods and it's just covered in mayapple. It's just an incredible sight. Unless you're very lucky, you're never going to taste a mayapple. And the reason is the rabbits and the deer will get them before you do. If you have a mayapple, which is sometimes confusingly called an American mandrake, fence it off. Put just a little cage around it and wait. It's going to form a little flower under these kind of umbrella-like leaves. They're wide and shiny, very pretty little plant. It'll form a little flower, and after that flower fades, it will form a little fruit. That little fruit is so sought after for making jam, especially. But like I said, unless you can keep the animals away from it, you're never going to get it. Now, in old herbal medicine, I'm talking like the Thomsonians, the eclectics, and such, they used to use the mayapple root as a purgative. Don't do that. This is what you would call an irritating purgative. In other words, it's not just a laxative, it will give you diarrhea, the likes of which are as bad as the worst case of food poisoning you've ever had. So, as long as you have another option, I mean, I suppose if it was an absolute emergency, maybe you could think about it. But as long as you've got, say, some plantain growing nearby, and you can harvest some plantain seeds, which are where we get psyllium from, and plantain grows everywhere, do that. Or, or just eat some dandelion leaves, get some roughage, get some vegetables in you. I would not mess with a mayapple root, but if you can get the fruit, really fantastic. And if you ever get down to Moxville, North Carolina, and go to the old cemetery right in the middle of town, you can see where Daniel Boone's parents were buried. Really interesting area for history. A lot of history took place there. Beautiful area too. It's one of the unknown treasures of North Carolina. I would say the entire Uwharrie National Forest is an unknown treasure in North Carolina. Actually, could be the oldest mountain range on Earth, by the way. And if you do ever get up that way, go up to Morrow Mountain, and up at the top of the peak, there's a big picnic area and like observation deck. My grandfather actually built that, so you can see some of his work. All right, milkweed. Milkweed is one when it comes up, just the young shoots, the sprout, can be cooked and eaten like asparagus. Very good. A lot of people say leave the milkweed alone. The monarch butterflies need it for food. Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. Thanks to people plowing their fields all the way to the edges and overuse of Roundup and other such chemicals, we are losing a lot of wild space. I don't see anywhere near the number of fireflies I used to see. Reason I don't see fireflies is there aren't big stands of weeds on the edges of fields there anymore, where the fireflies would be among the wildflowers. All right, mint. Yeah, this is the time to be picking your mint. Spearmint, peppermint, watermint. Mints are wonderful. Apple mint. Any mints that grow wild. Remember 2 shows ago I told you how to identify your mints. Mulberries. Mulberry trees around here have not begun to produce yet. But the tender, this is according to the Peterson's Field Guide, the tender new leading shoots make an outstanding cooked vegetable when collected, as the leaves are just unfolded, boiled for 20 minutes. That's good to know, but there's also a little warning here, which is unripe fruits or raw shoots contain hallucinogens. So, I guess we need to give a good warning on that so you don't go out there and eat unripe fruits or raw shoots and start seeing things. The fruit's really good. It can be a little what they call insipid, a little flat. So really good if you crush them up and make a jam or wine and add a little citrus to it. Put in a little bit of lemon juice. Now this is when our summer mushrooms are beginning to come in, and I am sure after this tropical storm, the woods are going to be full of them. That the activity of the storm, the electromagnetic activity, actually encourages mushrooms to fruit. And interestingly enough, some mushrooms can be encouraged to fruit from thunder. In Japan, where they grow a lot of shiitakes and such, one of the ways they will force them to fruit is if they're, like, say, on a stump or a log, to whack it with a mallet. For some reason, the vibration, like they would get naturally from thunder, causes them to fruit. So before and after a tropical storm or hurricane, I usually have the best mushroom foraging. That's when I find my chicken in the woods like crazy. And chicken in the woods is coming in right now. Your meadow mushroom, puffballs, those giant puffballs that can get up to the size of, say, a volleyball, real easy to identify. They don't have much flavor, but cooked with butter and onions. I mean, come on, any mushroom's good cooked with butter and onions. Sulfur shelf, which is what I call chicken in the woods. Oyster mushrooms should be coming in now, and shaggy manes. Your mustards are coming in now, and last week we talked about the mustard family, how to find those. Wild onions, I've already covered that. Pawpaws are such a great fruit. This is one, unless you go out and find it in the woods, you're not going to find it because they're soft and mushy. They don't make it to market. This is our native tropical fruit, and it grows well up into the mountains where I live. It is very much like a papaya. It's also called a custard apple. It's never going to make it to the grocery store. Maybe you can find some in a local farmer's market, but it needs to have been picked that day or at most the very day before because it goes soft and mushy and bad fast. But if you can get it, it's wonderful. And yes, the seeds do have medicinal uses. Plantains, I've already mentioned plantain. We've got broadleaf plantain and the narrowleaf plantain grow throughout. Plantain was one of those plants they called white man's footprint because the Indians said wherever white men went, plantains grew. Whether we carried the seeds here for food or medicine, which many of the early settlers did, or the seeds just hitchhiked on clothing as they came over, plantain is widespread and it's one of our most valuable medicinal plants. You can actually use a plantain leaf like a band-aid for a small cut. You can make poultices out of plantains for burns and stings. Plantain is a wonderful healing herb, a wonderful soothing herb, and a very good cooked pot herb or green. Pokeweed really should have been harvested in spring, but if you kept picking it, if you've already been picking your poke greens, they keep growing back with nice tender greens. Prickly pear. Now's the time for the pads. Prickly pear cactus, opportunity. It won't be bearing fruit yet. In fact, in my area, it still has some beautiful yellow flowers on it. But prickly pear pads, often called tunas in Mexican grocery stores, are an excellent edible. The way you want to collect these is either obviously with gloves, better yet a pair of tongs, cut them off, and then burn the spines off either with a torch or holding them over a gas burner. And then you peel them. And they have almost an okra-like quality, mucilaginous type quality, grilled, used in a lot of like Yucatan area tacos. Pretty delicious. And they're also medicinal. Those pads make an excellent poultice. In fact, out west and in Mexico and such, if someone cut or any kind of wound, scorpion sting, snake bite, spider bite, whatever, they'll take that, peeled cactus pad and put it on there as a poultice to draw out. It's tonifying, it tightens the skin, It reduces the chance of infection, and it's actually a drawing poultice that can draw out infection and venom. So very useful to have some prickly pear cactus growing in your yard or nearby so you can use it for first aid and as a great source of food. And later in the year when those fruits develop, that's one of my favorites. All right, purslane. Purslane is a low-growing weed. It's another one that was brought here either from medicine or food. It's just grown all over the place. Most people think of it as an absolute nuisance. But purslane is a very nutritious edible. It it has thick, fleshy leaves and very much like okra. Let's give you a description of purslane from Peterson. All right, purslane, purslane. It's a low-growing prostrate plant with succulent light green leaves and reddish stems. Note the rosettes of the fleshy, paddle-shaped leaves, each with a small, stalkless, five-petaled flower that opens only on sunny mornings. Found in rich sandy soils, waste places throughout the region. Uses: salad, cooked green, pickle, and flour. The mildly acid, mucilaginous stems and leaves are excellent added fresh to salads or boiled for 10 minutes in just enough water to cover. Wash them thoroughly first and remove any sand or grit. The tender, fat stems can be pickled. The tiny black seeds can be made into a nutritious flour. The seeds will continue to ripen even though the plants are no longer in the ground. To gather them in quantity, place the plants on a sheet, dry for a few weeks, then pound and sift the dried plants through a strainer to separate the seeds from the rest. The leaves and stems are rich in iron, also contain vitamins A and C, calcium, and phosphorus. All right, sassafras. You can pretty much harvest sassafras any time of year, so long as you can still identify it because the leaves are on it. It's not the dead of winter. Sassafras root makes a wonderful tea. It's a wonderful, what we call a blood cleanser and tonic. I've discussed before how the federal government put out some really misleading and fraudulent studies trying to say sassafras was carcinogenic. Those studies have since been disproven, but it's still illegal to buy and sell sassafras as a food product or an herbal medicine in the United States. Your government at work, folks. All right, sorrel. Sorrel is, one of my favorite greens. And you have various varieties of sorrel. Garden sorrels have usually gotten out of people's gardens and have gone feral, as they call it. What we normally find around my area is what we used to call sourweed as a kid, or it's sheep sorrel. Sorrel has a uniquely shaped leaf, kind of impossible for me to describe verbally in any way that you would understand it. So just look up a picture of it. Sorrel is a flavor of like spinach with lemon juice already sprayed on it. It has a little bit of oxalic acid, and it's a wonderful green, very high in vitamin C. Excellent in your salad, excellent as a cooked green, excellent for just munching on. But they always put in that warning of too much oxalic acid can be toxic. You'd have to eat a whole lot of it. And that same oxalic acid is in wood sorrel, which looks like shamrocks. Okay, so you have the sorrel that looks like a garden salad green. You have the sorrel that's called sheep sorrel, which has narrow leaves and long reddish stalks and tastes very lemony and sour when you chew on the stalk. And then you have what most people think of as clover or shamrocks, but it's actually wood sorrel. And you'll see a sorrel pretty much anywhere. Again, an easy one to get started on. Anybody can identify sorrel. You can't mistake it for anything else that I'm aware of. Sow thistle. All right, so Peterson Field Guide says sow thistle. It's a Sonchus, by the way, Sonchus species, and these are widespread. Tall plants with prickly edged leaves, bitter milky juice, and dandelion-like blossoms in loose, somewhat flat-top clusters. Use: salad or cooked greens. The young leaves can be prepared like those of common dandelion. In the case of spiny leaf thistle, remove the spines first. Spring beauty is one that, unless you live in North Carolina, Virginia, a few other places, it's not very common. And where it does grow, it's often too rare to pick. But it's a really neat plant if you do have it. We actually have Spring Beauty Carolina So it kind of tells you where the center of spring beauty grows. I mean, that's the species, spring beauty Carolina. All right, the spring beauties or Claytonia. A single pair of smooth leaves are attached halfway up a delicate stem. Petals are white to pale pink with dark pink veins. It's a very pretty flower. It's one of those wildflowers that, you know, you're going to stop and notice even if you don't know it's medicinal or edible. The use, it's basically a potato substitute. It says it's excellent but tedious to gather in quantity. Boil for 10 to 15 minutes, strip off the tough outer jackets, and serve with butter. Now they're talking the root, of course. That's a good potato substitute, but like I said, and it's the root, or corm. I guess it's officially a corm, but in most places it's going to be too rare to gather. If you happen to be in North Carolina in the Appalachians, and you see a lot of spring beauty caroliniana, hey, if there's enough of it, take a few. Just don't take too many, right? Sumac. The sumacs, yeah, they're starting to get some berries now. We have various varieties of sumac, and poison sumac has white berries. If you see a sumac with white berries, stay as far away from it as you can. The other sumacs, like staghorn sumac and smooth sumac, have red berries. I'm just going to ask you to look them up and see what they look like. They grow everywhere in North Carolina except probably the coast. I don't think I've seen any at the coast. You can drive through roadsides, especially going through like old Yadkin and Wilkes County, and the sides of the roads are just covered in sumacs, usually just absolutely weighted down with berries. Some people call sumac berries lemonade berries. They're sour. They can actually be crushed to make a lemonade-like beverage. Good survival food. The animals live on it, and most humans don't even know it's there. Unfortunate. In fact, in a lot of areas, it gets cut out as a weed. Sweet goldenrod. Now's a good time to gather your goldenrod leaves. Violets. I've discussed before how violets, the whole plant's edible. Absolutely delicious. Watercress is a really good one. We discussed watercress last week in our show about the mustards. One thing I failed to mention about the watercress, make sure where it's growing, the water is clean. Just like you don't drink downstream from the herd, you don't gather your watercress downstream from cattle, campsites, from anywhere that any kind of fecal material could be getting into that water. It needs to be clean water. People have actually gotten liver flukes from eating watercress from unclean water. So make sure your water's clean. And as iffy as things are these days, I feel pretty comfortable with it in the middle of the national forest. But if I was in most places, I'd probably try to grow it in the garden. I described back on our episode about growing herbs how you can do an herb spiral and get a lot more room for growing herbs and use the sun angles and shade to grow various herbs in a small place. And at the bottom of the spiral, you can put a little pool. So you water it from the top, and the water runs down and it collects in this little pool. And in that little pool, you can have some water-loving plants. You could have a few frogs, maybe some mosquito fish or something. Uh, anyway, it's a great place to grow your watercress. So if I was designing a backyard garden and I didn't live in the middle of a national forest, that's probably where I would have my watercress. Wild ginger is another one that is extremely rare. It does grow in the mountains near me. I run across it every now and then. In most places, it's just too rare to harvest. It is a plant that tastes much like ginger. And it does have the oxalic acid crystals. Too much of it can really irritate your throat, could even cause crystals in your urine. It's not one you're probably ever going to see. If you do, you're going to see this really unique flower. It is a beautiful plant. Um, it really is a gorgeous plant, a weird looking plant. It's like an alien species almost, but you're probably never going to see it in abundance enough to harvest, unfortunately. In earlier America, it was much more common than it is now, but we cleared a lot of land and replanted it with things that weren't there originally. We tend to like single species as opposed to diversity. That's what screws everything up. Wild plums, yes, this is definitely the time to start looking for those wild plums. I grew up on those. They're absolutely delicious. Just remember, green plums will upset your stomach. They're almost as bad as those Mayapple roots. You want your plums nice and ripe. Wild rice. If you live in an area where you can collect wild rice, I am envious. I love wild rice, and we just do not have it wild around here, at least not in any abundance. Wild rose. We talked before about the roses. We talked about them last week. Wild strawberries. Again, this is one most people overlook. They just walk right over the wild strawberries. They're small, but once you learn to identify them, they're just little strawberries. They look just like the strawberries in the field. They're just tiny. And there is one little look-alike, but it's not poisonous, so that's one you can get started on looking for. Wood sorrel, I already mentioned your sorrel. And yucca. Now, when we talk about yucca, let me differentiate. We're not talking about the yucca root you're going to see in a grocery store sometimes. In South America, they have plant they call yucca root, and those are very important to their diet. Yeah, I really do enjoy yucca root cooked like French fries, dipped in a little chimichurri. Absolutely delicious. Our yuccas that grow wild up here, completely different species. Okay, our yucca roots are poisonous. Don't eat a yucca root. There's actually two varieties, and one of them so toxic they said that the Indians used to dip their arrows in them to poison them. I have no idea if that's true or a myth. They have spiky, long, spiky leaves. They will stick in you. Everybody knows what a yucca is that's ever backed into one. Those leaves are full of little fibers that can be used to make cordage. The edible part of the yucca plant that grows in our area is the flowers. The white flowers that should be on it right now are very good. They can be added to salads. They're not going to fill you up, but they're definitely something that can add some variety to your plate. So, I hope I've given you some things to look for in your summer foraging adventures. I guess in addition to the books I mentioned, you need a really good mushroom guide if you're going to do any mushroom foraging. And there are lots of good mushroom guides available. You need to find one specific to your area. I have mushroom guides specifically for the Appalachian Mountains. I have mushroom guides specifically for the southeastern United States. I have the Audubon field guide for mushrooms. I have mushrooms demystified. I have a whole shelf full of mushroom books. And honestly, I don't think you can have too many. Just remember, you do need one with the key. That is especially important in mushrooms. Learn to identify the poisonous mushrooms first so that you never pick them and eat them by mistake. I can't emphasize that too much. The keys are what's necessary in any field guide for any plant. Don't look at pictures. Don't even pay attention so much to drawings. Look for, with mushrooms, where's the mushroom growing? That's going to be one of the questions asked. Or does it have gills or not? Is it spongy? Okay, that's going to be another one. Are the gills attached or are they free? What's the color? You'll go through all these questions, and it's like a choose your own adventure book. When you get to the end of those questions, it's going to tell you your mushroom is this species. It's either poisonous or it's edible or don't bother. That's what you want in a mushroom book. That's what you want in a good field guide. Y'all have a great week. And do remember, if you have any interest in Americana and entertaining characters, to look up George Herter. The man was a legend. Bradford Angier, pretty darn good too. And remember, Billy Joe Tatum's book, don't forget that one. It's a good one. And always get those Peterson field guides. And I will see you next week.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.